Hello and welcome everyone to the Climate Podcast. My name is Jamil, and the Climate Podcast is basically a podcast in which we discuss anything and anything with today's climate. Today's topic will be about the political climate, more specifically, the Black Lives Matter movement. Here before you are three of my esteemed guests. Thank you guys for being on. I'll let you guys go in any order you want. Maybe we can start with Fanta. Introduce yourself.
Hi guys, my name is Fanta. I'm 19, go to U of I, majoring in computer science and anthropology. I don't really have anything to plug. I'm not really doing much. But yeah, that's it.
Irfan.
Hi, my name is Irfan Fasdain. I am a data analytics student going to Ohio State. I also don't have much to plug. Support everything that's going on right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, and make your voices heard.
All right, Jad.
Hey, my name is Jad. I'm 20 years old. I'm a biomedical engineering student from Loyola University, Chicago. Like the rest, I don't really have much to plug, but you can catch me on Instagram. Like, if you have any questions or if I said something that you thought was interesting, at Jad101. Yeah, very creative username. But yeah, definitely, as Irfan said, just support, make your voice heard, because the only way that we can make a change in our world today is by having numbers, and by having numbers makes the loudest voice. So please do that.
Agreed. And just for anybody that is watching, the whole goal of this podcast is simply to educate and for you guys to get an understand of our point of views, and in turn for you to learn more, to see how the world views what's going on right now. So with that being said, let's get started into the questions. We can go into the same order of how we introduce ourselves. So we could do Fanta, Irfan, Jad, and then me. And then once we've all given our answers, we can do a free discussion amongst ourselves. Sound good?
Sure.
All right. So the first question is, what is Black Lives Matter, and what does it mean to you?
Okay, well, I'd say that Black Lives Matter is a movement basically to finally bring to light a lot of the injustice that Black people face in America specifically, even though it is a global problem. I think Black Lives Matter definitely focuses on US specific issues. And I think it's just I wouldn't even call it an organization, because it's not a specific group of people. It's just simply a statement that backs a movement to bring to light a lot of the problems that Black people face in America, and to get justice for those problems using using their platform.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. So just to answer the question first off, I think Black Lives Matter is pretty robust. There's so many different goals, so many different people, and it's not just one group trying to do one thing. There's no person spearing it. It's just so many different people with their own reasons and their own ideologies brought to it. But at its core, I think it's a lot about spreading awareness of the issues that Black people face in America, and what problems there are in the society, and how we need to as a country and as a people actually have to change things in our society to make sure that these problems don't keep occurring, and so that these problems stop here and now. And I think it's more about making sure that people understand that these problems do occur, and it's not just one or two things, one-off issues that come and go, and it has to keep evolving so that we can make change happen, stop these issues from occurring again.
Yeah, agreed.
I think Black Lives Matter it's a movement for sure, to say the least. It's a lot of things, and I think because of its diversity, it makes it so interesting. That there's so many people that want to achieve a common goal, but obviously people want to achieve it in different ways, and it just brings about a lot of different perspectives. And the great thing about this is that diversity itself is also very intriguing, to say the least, in the movement. I guess Black Lives Matter, in a very general sense, could be stated as people that want a certain goal, and behind the words Black Lives Matter as the movement, just to put a face on it, just to tell people what it's all about. but yeah, I think it's obviously a great movement. I think let's just hope that we get what we want sooner than later.
Yeah. I guess the way I see Black Lives Matter movement is that this is, first of all, the most beautiful movement I have seen. I mean, since I was born, I've never seen any group of people get together like this to fight against injustices. But this is to fight against the injustices against African Americans. Not even just since the inception of America, literally since they stepped foot on this soil, the white supremacists have been putting down Black people for hundreds of years, and this movement is to sort of undo everything. And it's going to be a long process, but I think what's been happening in 2020 is we're definitely making big moves. I think we definitely are. We're making progress because now people are becoming more self-aware, and I think that's where people need to start. You need to understand that, what am I doing wrong and how can I help? So that's how I look at the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay, so in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, I guess some open discussion we can have is about, like, were you guys expecting this? And if you were you expecting it in 2020? Because I mean, I knew for sure there had to have been a breaking point. I mean, this has been going on for such a long time with injustices against Black people. I think it was a matter of time, but I guess 2020 has been already this crazy of a year that it had to happen. That had to happen this year.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it, because there's so many times where Black Lives Matter has come up, and there's so many different cases where this has been a problem. And George Floyd is now the point right now that it occurred for this to happen, for the amount of protests right now to happen. And I think that's not, like, there's so many different variables that came to this point for it to be such a breaking point. And, like, especially, with the climate of the world right now, with coronavirus and everything happening in that front, everyone was inside. No one was, everyone was thinking. No one was, like, doing anything particularly crazy or big, and everyone's off of work, everyone's back home not studying, and it was just this melting pot of so many different things that happened for all of this injustice to, like, and just one person, that problem caused it to be so wide, where everyone connected to that video that came out. And it's scary to think that if that video never came out, that justice may never have been served. Like, that one person who recorded that video caused so much change to happen, and that I think there's a lot of stuff that had to happen for this to be the way it is right now. I think it's important.
Yeah, and it's not even that it may not have been served; it wouldn't have been served.
Right.
I can say that with full confidence. But yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Go ahead. Feel free to interrupt whenever you need to.
I was gonna say that, like, I honestly thought that, I guess, this big, like, build up, like, the fact that there's so much momentum behind the movement, I thought that was gonna come a lot earlier, honestly. But I do see why it happened now. I think with coronavirus, like, this is just a manifestation of a lot of building frustration, and it just, like, and it goes beyond just George Floyd or just police brutality. I think that's why that, like, people now are seeing that this is such a deep, like, rooted systemic problem, and that, like, it's, I think, another thing, like, with the fact that coronavirus is happening, it just proves that, like, in America at least, like, nothing can stop racism, I guess. Like, there's no one outside, right? And people are still, this is still happening. So I think just all these different aspects of it are making people who before weren't aware of it, when it was Trayvon Martin or Tamir Rice, they weren't aware of it, but now I think they're seeing it. And I think that's why it feels like there's so much more momentum.
And to anyone watching this, Trayvon Martin's killer is free, and he's suing the Trayvon Martin family for $100 million. That is disgusting.
He's a terrible, he's like a horrible, horrible person. Disgusting. And his family never got any justice. And I think that's, like, horrible.
I just wanted to touch upon the fact that, like we said before, like, racism, realistically talking, racism will never end. It's going to be always there, but we can always alleviate it. And I think that Black Lives Matter would be is a very good way of raising awareness. And it's been a big common motive of throughout society right now, that there's no such thing as being not racist. You have to be anti-racist, and that's the way that you can actually get your points across. Because I feel like in the society that we're in today, the only way that you can actually make a difference is to be aggressive, or like to be like to push your motives, your ideas onto everybody. Because if you don't, you're not going to be heard. And I think I just want to transition that into like petitions, for example. I believe petitions are a very good cause, and I think that they really help the cause in general. But if we're talking about how are they going to work in the long run, they will most likely, or at least in my eyes, they wouldn't make as much of an impact as, say, protesting. Protesting obviously makes the most noise. I just feel like the more aggressive that we are, to obviously a reasonable amount, the better our chances of to get our rights. And that's how George Floyd ended up, or like the case, the end up verdict for the officer. I'm sorry, I forgot his name. The officer, I shouldn't have.
Don't even say his name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter.
Went from a third-degree murder to a second-degree murder, and I think that was very well made because of our all of our contributions as a society to make that noise.
And you know what did it? The actual change that we can make is by reaching out to people who can actually change the laws. You know, everybody started
Exactly.
emailing. I believe it was the attorney general. It was someone in Minnesota who can actually make a change. And the very next day, after everyone spammed their emails, the charges raised and all the other officers were charged. That just shows the power of who we need to target to actually make change. You know, it's the people who make the laws, which is a good segue into the next
Yeah.
question, which is, what is the hierarchy of what Black Lives Matter should be focusing on, based on, you know, what we've seen on social media, what we're seeing on the news, maybe, you know, what we've seen happen to other people or ourselves? What do you think is the hierarchy? What's the number one thing? Or if there isn't a hierarchy, should everything be focused on in an equal amount?
I think in terms of like hierarchy, I think in general, and just sort of like, I don't want to say like normal times, but when there's not like a specific person we're talking about, like now is George Floyd, before it was like Trayvon, you know what I mean? Like there was a person. I think at that moment, and like right now it's George Floyd and then Breonna Taylor, she's another one. Now that the cops who got arrested, like justice is most likely going to be served for George Floyd, I think now our next focus should be on Breonna Taylor, because she's someone who was literally shot in her home while asleep. And then those cops are still working, they're still free. So I think when there's times like that, when there's like a specific moment of injustice, I think it's good that the Black Lives Matter movement focuses on that person, because that's how change happens. Because if it was focusing on everything, every systemic problem, then people wouldn't be emailing the attorney general, like you said, and then the degree wouldn't be raised. But I think in general, I don't think there should be a hierarchy, because there's so many aspects of injustice in America, and there's so many intertwining aspects of injustice. Like racism isn't just police brutality, isn't just the KKK, white supremacists. It's like classism is a big issue. Like everything comes together. So I think in general, we should be focusing on everything, but I think in specific moments, it's good to focus on specific things.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because there's so many issues that come to mind when you think Black Lives Matter. There's so many, like police brutality, there's classism, there's just general racism, and there's no way that everyone can tackle everything at once. So focusing like all of our efforts on one thing can cause change. Like we had, like everyone worked together to make this happen, to have these 4 officers get charged, and if there was no like specific thing that we were fighting for, none of that would have happened. And I feel like that's important to make sure that if there's a specific injustice that we want to fight, we have to fight it. And once that justice is served, people with the amount of people in and talking about Black Lives Matter, they can see that there's these bigger injustices that need to be covered, and there's these bigger problems that we need to start solving one by one. And once things get solved, it'll be a domino effect of people trying to make change happen.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about focusing on one specific thing, I think the way that hierarchy would work the best would be, change is known to work from top to bottom. Start with the top. If you start with the top and change the top, the bottom will follow, as said in the domino effect that Irfan just just mentioned. If we change how the policymakers do their make these policies, obviously, if we change how the government's ideologies and the way that they think and go about all these cases, there's no doubt in my mind that our society would be a lot better with just battling racism and just racism in general. Because a lot of people look up to these people as like the idols of just the way that the government works and the way our society runs. So if we have the top people and we can get like celebrities and all these different people that people look up to on this one big trend of Black Lives Matter, and whatever the case may be down the line, because I can guarantee you there's going to be many other times where the people will have to stand up to demand some sort of right. Everybody else will follow. And I think that's probably the best way to like combat all this negativity.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think as of probably the past day, the shift has sort of gone to Breonna Taylor because there has been no justice brought to her at all. And I think as we've seen with, subjectively the amount of justice that has been brought to George Floyd, that a degree of justice can be brought if we start to focus on these issues. So I guess, to continue the conversation, let's say that justice is brought to Breonna Taylor. What is the next step? Because from what I've seen is people, I'm under the impression that if we bring justice to Breonna Taylor, then we just attack the governments as a whole. But the thing is that won't be as effective if we don't have something specific to attack them with. We need to, reach for something specific. So I guess my question is to you is, assuming justice ends up being brought to Breonna Taylor, what do we move on to? How do we make even more significant process in removing systemic racism?
I think the next step is police reform. And you could see it like, and even police reform or just completely moving to reallocate police funds to other like social services. I think that's the next step because in Minnesota, they're talking about defunding the police department. In Chicago, there's a petition for defunding the CPD or having UIC stop giving money to the CPD to be on campus and things like that. I think that is a good next step because that's one of those issues that is higher up. And I think that would cause a good trickle down effect because those funds can easily be reallocated to making society a place that doesn't even need so much excessive policing. So yeah, that's what I think is a good next step.
And you actually shared something that I really liked with the girl on TikTok about what her view was on what we should do with the police department. No one is saying that we just need to throw away the entire police department because we do need a form of law enforcement, but we need a reformation of how people become police officers, what the requirements are, what the training is, how long the training is. I mean, it's just from top to bottom.
The whole system is like a mess. So it's not saying like we don't need any form of policing inside. It's just the fact that the way that America set up our police system and what it even came from, it was never meant to protect the people. It never really was. So I think using either reallocating funds or putting in funds to do like a top to bottom reformation of the police department. I think that should be what we should be calling for next.
Yeah, I mean, like it's crazy to think like there's so many pictures and videos and everything online right now. But if you think about the fact that just a couple months ago, during coronavirus, these doctors were wearing garbage bags to protect themselves from coronavirus. And now we see thousands and thousands of these police officers in riot gear and everything just set up and just stored there, just sitting there with face masks and everything on the go.
Dressed up like Master Chief.
Yeah, like it's crazy to think that all these funds are just sitting there and, like we're waiting to use them. And when we use them, it's useless. Like it's not useless, but it's this point where they're overusing this force in a point where they don't need to, and they don't need the amount of gear and everything that they have right now. And it's crazy to think that that's just how the funds work and how much there's just inequality where things are going. And we need to change that. Yeah, it's important that the police like brutality is spawned within how the system works. It's not just some bad apples like people are saying. It's legitimately a problem in the source of the police, and like it's reinforced within the police. There's so many cases where these police officers, even the ones that want to do right, don't do right because that's just how they're reinforced. They can't do the right thing, and it's just sad to see.
Yeah, agreed.
It's very important to understand what we should do and how, and always plan the next steps to come, just to be, better prepared, etc. But I also think that a very good thing to touch on is what we shouldn't do. What the society should not do is let the hype die. That is the worst thing that we can do as a society right now, is stop talking. If we stop talking, all changes and anything that we can think of here on forward will not happen. So if we continue to make this hype and make this amount of noise, we'll only go up from here. Do not stop sharing this type of stuff. Do not stop talking about all the police brutality and injustices that happen. If you stop talking, there's no voice. So please keep talking.
That was actually a good segue into what I was about to bring up as another topic of conversation is, what if the intensity continues, what needs to happen in order for, I guess you can say, life to simmer back down again, if that's even possible at all, or if you even think that life should be simmering back down. Do you see that happening in the near future, or what needs to happen if you think it needs to happen?
I just think, like, if people want things to go back to normal, I think that phrase in itself is a little bit wrong, because normal right now is injustice. Normal right now is like Black people being killed. So I think there should be, I don't know, I think the intensity needs to continue for a very long time until the government actually starts listening to its people. If so many people, specifically like minorities, people of color, are talking about how policing in their communities is a negative, but the government is still over policing those specific communities, then the intensity needs to continue because no change has happened. So if people want things to go back to normal, they need to understand that to even say that is to be ignorant, I'd say, because that means you think that normal was good for the majority of people, when a lot of times it's not, like, at all.
Yeah.
There's never going to be a perfect utopia of a society. We're always going to have problems. We're always going to need to stand up to say something, because there's always going to be some sort of injustices. And I'm sure we've all seen this pattern of as soon as society's quiet, that's when the most things happen. So if we continue to keep loud, there's nothing, or I'm not saying there's nothing going to happen. There's obviously no guarantee that nothing's going to happen, but we can guarantee the alleviation of having this much police brutality, all this different stuff that is happening. And I'm sure it got to its worst peak I've seen in a long time with George Floyd. And I think that's what really, all 50 states are all protesting. When was the last time we saw anything like this happen, where all 50 states come together in unity and protest something so huge? So I think if we continue to make this loud noise, like I was talking about before, we should probably see less injustices, hopefully, in the near future.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
No, I was planning on seeing what you were gonna say first.
Right. I mean, I think, everything Jad said is important. There's so many causes that live for such a short amount of time in history and die, and nothing else is said about them. And it's important that, and I'm happy that this has gone for this amount of time already. Like, this is an insane amount of time that for something like this to keep going. And I hope that it doesn't stop, that it has to keep going, that people need to keep talking and make sure that for things to keep happening, and not just spreading like false, like just small like truths, being like, oh yeah, I'm not racist. That's not what we need. We need much more than that. We need to be anti-racist, like Jad said earlier. We need people to understand what a big problem this is, and to continue that for as long as humanly possible, so that these governments finally hear that and listen to our problems and change it.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into my next question. Is it possible for the Black Lives Matter movement to eventually become a success? And if so, what are the specific things that we need to change? For example, are there any laws that are on your mind? Are there any form of systemic racism that is on your mind that we need to abolish in order for the Black Lives Matter movement to be considered a success, if that is even possible?
I think that because the Black Lives Matter movement represents such a wide scale operation, I guess. I don't think there's any way that could end, really. I do think it could have successes, but I don't think the movement itself could be a success, just because I think Jad was saying it earlier, we're never going to have a completely non-racist or a completely anti-racist society. There's always going to be white supremacists, just because that's how America was built on that. So of course it's not going to just go away. For that to go away, we'd have to start America over, and that wouldn't happen. So I think Black Lives Matter just needs to focus on each individual success and keep building upon that, instead of saying, okay, we got justice for George Floyd, so we don't need to do anything anymore. Because if you look at any other sort of movements, like in the 50s, 60s, civil rights movement, that never really ended because they passed the Civil Rights Act. It just evolved into Black Lives Matter, honestly. And gay rights and stuff, they didn't stop talking about gay rights once gay marriage was passed. There's still a lot of issues that LGBT people face. So it's those type of wide scale systemic movements, I think they just need to continue building on each success. But I think ending it is just sort of giving up almost, because the government is just going to go right back to doing what they were doing before if we just stop. So I think they just need to continue building on the momentum.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's basically everything I was about to say. It's just the fact that they can't stop. If they stop, then we will go back to what was the problem. And I think in order for these changes to happen, there's so many issues here, and focusing on an issue is pretty important. And I think right now a lot of people's eyes are on police brutality, just with not only the fact that so many Black people in the past have been just utterly destroyed by the policing system, and it's sad to see all these cases that haven't gone with justice. But now finally we have so many people going for this cause to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or at least stops happening soon. And for that to happen, we need to obviously change this policing system. There's also so many other issues. There's these issues with just the class system in general that's set up in America, with so many different inequalities set up for minorities and Black people in particular to fail, just so that as soon as they get off their feet, they won't be able to climb. And I think those issues need to be solved too, and that those are systemic problems. Those are rooted in America right now. And it's hard to just say oh, we need to change, you just need to change things. But and I think once one thing has been slowly evolved, things like police brutality aren't as big an issue. They're always going to be issues, but once they kind of evolve to the point where we can finally say that people aren't constantly in injustice, we need to focus on the other issues at hand, with Black people in particular, with so many different issues in America. And I think it'll just keep going. There's never going to be a point where we say that everyone is not racist and everyone is equal, which is sad to say, but that's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I 100% agree everything that was just said. But I guess just to I don't have much to add on. I think all the points were touched on it. But yeah, Black Lives Matter would never end, because for it to end would mean racism ends, and there's no such thing. That will never happen. Racism will always be there. So there's no policy. There's nothing that we can push that would change the outlook of every single soul out there to not be racist. That's not a thing. So Black Lives Matter, the stronger they become, the easier and the less injustice there will be in the society.
Yeah, and actually I wanted to touch upon what Fanta was talking about, how there's how we can have smaller successes on the way, but it won't necessarily fully end. I think that what needs to end up happening is, once we start to deal with the injustices that we can see with our eyes, such as police brutality, we need to start, once that is over, move on to things that people don't see. Because the reality is, majority of the injustices that happen to Black people are things that people don't see, such as redlining, with how the banks are choosing who they want to give out loans to based on, well, they don't say it's based on race, but it's based on race, and it's shown with proof and evidence through decades of research. Also, qualified immunity. I was looking over qualified immunity. I don't know if you guys know what that is. It's literally, it says that it shields the police from being sued for certain things unless it clearly violates a person's rights. Now, that's to say that people shouldn't get in trouble unless they violate somebody's rights. It almost seems like it's such an unnecessary bill to make. And then you start to think more and more about it. Well, why would they make such an unnecessary bill? And it's clear to me now that it's literally qualified immunity literally just exists to protect the police officers against almost anything unless it's so clear and overt, like with the George Floyd situation, that people have no choice but to avoid it, which is a scary thing to think about, that, you know, they won't be able to receive justice unless it's 100% clear. That's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, but even then, it's like when it does to other people, it seems like this is a clear, like at protests and stuff, you've seen cop cars run through crowds of people.
Yes.
If any other person were to run their car through a crowd of people, they would be arrested. And even at protests with people who aren't cops, just people who are anti-Black Lives Matter, they go to these protests, it's crowded, and they literally drive their car through people. And it's like that, they should be in jail. But then people see that the protesters, they consider protesters worse, I guess. So those people, even though to everyone else it seems clear, oh, you shouldn't try and run people over, they like, it's like laws don't exist all of a sudden. It's like weird.
Like they're above the law because of qualified immunity. And,
Yeah.
and you know, qualified immunity, in a sense, does allow them to be above the law. And it's sad.
Yeah, no, it's scary to see like how much corruption there really is. Because yeah, these laws exist that literally are just there to protect the police, and there's so many different cases where these police officers do things knowing full well that they won't be charged on any account, and they know that they don't have to worry about what their actions are. They don't have to be accountable for their actions. And there's so many cases where these police officers just continue to cause issues and they're still not arrested or just still not charged on anything. And I think there are small changes being done, hopefully to change that forever, with the fact that we can finally, I forgot what state it is, but they're trying to make sure that individual police officers can be sued. And that wasn't a thing before, which is crazy to think. Like, I did not think that was an issue, but you know, there's so many things like that with like DAs connected to these police officers so that they don't have to worry about these things. They can just like clear them over and never have to worry about, you know, having injustice done upon them. And it's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Fanta said a while back, how America was built on the concepts of racism because of the just the constituency of who was the ones making it. We have to battle through all these centuries of these systematic racisms, as well as all these policies that were passed to make these police officers as well as others, you know, just immune to these, you know, very basic, simple stuff that should be putting people in jail. If it wasn't even like, police officers are quite literally getting away with murder and they're not getting anything for it. And I think it was a very good idea to bring up not the implied, but like the brush under the rug type racism stuff, because if we don't I guess you can quite literally say stay woke about this type of stuff, you won't be able to catch it. American government doesn't make mistakes. That doesn't happen. They don't pass a policy that just seems, you know, unnecessary or seems
They know what they're
not
doing.
needed.
Yeah.
They know exactly what they're doing. So just whenever the American government does something that might not seem like this, there's always, I guarantee you, a bigger picture behind it. So just stay like, make sure you take a double good look at, you know, certain things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that's why they've been getting away with it for so long.
And you know, another big question that I have and a lot of people are wondering, that I feel like hasn't even been talked about enough is, does the Black Lives Matter movement need a leader? Is it even possible for us to have a leader? And if so, would you say that we need more of a Martin Luther King, a Malcolm X, both, or neither?
I don't think the Black Lives Matter movement needs a person, because if you look at any historical movements, when there is like the face of a movement of the government that is just inherently anti-government because anti the institutions the government has made, they are targeted, like their lives are targeted for the entire existence.
Mhm.
So I think it's better that it's not just one person as the face, because it makes it harder. And that's why people are so adamant about blocking out the faces of protesters, because when the government like sniffs you out and they're like, oh, this person might be trying to lead a revolution or anything
Mhm.
that could possibly question the government, they have the power to find out all your information and watch you. And because of that, that's why in Ferguson, so many protesters ended up dead, because people didn't block out their faces. So they're easy to identify. Now their name is in some database and they're being targeted. So I think it's better when everyone takes responsibility, because the government can't assassinate everyone. You know what I mean? But when you say, oh, this is our person, and once they go, we crumble because we're all looking up to this person, the government's going to say, okay, this is our person that we're looking out for. And it's easy then to assassinate one person, but you can't assassinate thousands of people.
You know, that's actually crazy that you mentioned that, because now looking back at it, every time there was a person in the spotlight, they were killed. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and even Colin Kaepernick. The only reason Colin Kaepernick probably wasn't killed because he didn't lead a protest or any sort of huge movement. It was more of a silent protest. It was more of a peaceful protest. So they couldn't take him out of society, but they literally took him out of his profession.
They killed his voice. Like
They killed his voice.
He
Yeah.
doesn't have he has a platform still, but not at such a national scale.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be super fun.
I think those are all. I think those are all extremely important points to bring up. The fact that every single time a leader comes up, it's important to have someone to look at. But at the same time, when you have someone to look at, the opposition has someone to look at, and that's if we all are under the same umbrella, we're all under Black Lives Matter. At that point, they only have that to look at. They don't have one person to blame for everything that's happening in their eyes. But with what we have now, a movement, a people as a whole going ahead and doing all of these protests and pushing things forward, that causes all these, like the government and all the anti-Black Lives Matter people, to not just have one person to look at to be the cause of the issues for them. And I think that's really important, that we just keep moving forward as a people and instead of as just one person.
Yeah, while there are pros of having a single leader or some leaders, there's definitely major cons, and I think that we all agree on that. And I think that, well, let me like ask a question. What's the major like the major thing for power today? Like, how does somebody get power today? Through education. You have to be educated to get this power. And I think that's a really good thing that we should emphasize. We should be able to make sure that we emphasize the education. We need to push education. Everybody should be educated. If nobody said, God never put it anywhere that there can only be one Malcolm X. There can only be one Martin Luther King Jr. Why can't everybody have the same ideologies and have the same want to make justice be there? There's never been anything written down anywhere that says otherwise. And I think that if we all push our friends and our families to take matters into our own hands and investigate just the general political world, because our generations have started lacking a little bit when it comes to that type of stuff. And that's why, America has been getting away with so many things, is because until the youth started speaking up recently, they've been getting away with so much. So if we start educating ourselves more on these political manners, I think that would be the best, that would help us with our motives.
Yeah, that's a good point. People our age make the most change, and that's
Exactly.
seen throughout history. I mean, you go beyond America, you see people who are fighting for something greater than themselves. It tends to be people in our age range, which is why it's important that everybody, especially our friends, especially our family, push them to speak out as well, because our voices definitely do not go unheard, because people have no choice but to listen to us.
Yeah.
Okay. So this one is a big question. The question is, given the mixed opinions of our leaders and activists, what is your opinion on the looting of big businesses with the sole intention of promoting the Black Lives Matter movement? does looting distract us from what we're trying to fight for?
So I personally don't. I don't know. I think this sounds, but when it comes to looting of big businesses, I don't care because a lot of the times those corporations are like multi-million, billion-dollar corporations. They can easily afford whatever property damage happens, and a lot of those times in like those communities, those big corporations have a negative association in those communities. Like I personally don't know anything about a Target in a city in Minnesota and what that means to that community, but then it came out that many people in that community hate that Target for what they did, because when big corporations come in, they tend to push up the property value of. It's like when you see a Starbucks in a poor community, that's a bad sign because that means gentrification is coming. So people have negative associations with those businesses that I can't speak on because it's not in our community, but I don't see anything wrong with that, because that just shows it's representative of a bigger issue outside of, because people say, oh, what does Target have to do with George Floyd? It doesn't have to do with George Floyd, but it does have to do with an issue that comes into systemic racism. A Target comes in, raises the property value, and it kicks people in the community out. So people hate that Target. Now they loot that Target. It's not George Floyd. It's a separate issue that still matters, But I personally am completely against the looting of small businesses, POC-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses. Like, I don't think that should be happening in any way, because those are the people that we're fighting for. Those people, they're working class individuals, and those are our allies. Like, we can't tear down people that we need to lift up. But yeah, that's my.
Interesting they mentioned that, because Bernie Sanders said something, and this is why I stand Bernie. He said, big businesses have been looting America for over 200 years. And I thought about that. I'm like, damn, like he's so right. But yeah, no. So Irfan, what were you going to say?
I mean, everything said was definitely right. And I think that's like another thing to think about. In my eyes, something that I keep thinking about is the fact that the opposition looks at this looting and says, this is the problem. And the fact that they don't see the problem that we're trying to voice is the fact that a Black man was killed. And they're not mad at that, but they're mad at the fact that once the state-sponsored opposition comes in and people started fighting the state-sponsored opposition, all this rioting is caused because of the fact that these riot gear individuals are inciting so many of these things to happen. And people fight back. Obviously, you can't just stand there while people beat you to the ground, and that's what they look at, not the fact that a Black man was killed and that's why we're doing this in the first place.
Yeah,
and
people were silent about George Floyd, but all of a sudden people loot a Target and they go mad.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, no, I think that's the problem. And I think people need to show the opposition the opposition, and that the fact that I have to say that there's anti-Black people out there and we have to acknowledge them, that's scary to me. And I think that like we need to make sure that people understand the fact that they're looking at the wrong thing. And I think that we should talk about this a bit more in length later on, but for now, with the rioting and the protest and the whole like looting situation, I think businesses get looted, and that happened, and we can't really change that because it did happen. But the fact is that's not what we should be focusing on. The fact that happened because of other things that have happened, because of the fact that this man was killed, is the focus that we should be kind of spotlighting, instead of the fact that some people are looting these random business owners.
I might have an actual different stance on this.
Okay.
Looters obviously don't, they shouldn't be focused on as much. That's what I would argue. I think that the looters they're a good problem in our society today. And I think that the initial looting of Target could quite literally be like an analogy as like the Boston Tea Party, where people started making like an actual, like an aggressive voice for themselves by doing so. But at the same time, I do believe that looting should not, in the way that it's being held today, the amount of looting that's happening today, I honestly don't think that's a great idea to, not like shun away as of right now. Because not only is it morally wrong, but it's at the same time, it's like I'm trying to like put these words together in a way for you guys to understand. Uh, it's kind of like when people start looting places, it's like I'm trying to
No, no,
look for words
I
here.
completely get what you're trying to say, and the fact that you brought up that you do have a different opinion is, goes back to my original question that we have activists and leaders right now who are saying different things. I mentioned Bernie Sanders saying one thing, but then there was Barack Obama who actually fully condemned looting. So that sort of brings up, okay, well, we need to make sure we understand what we are fighting for and what our focuses need to be. As long as we keep our head on straight, we can try to, I guess, minimize unnecessary damage, like Fanta was saying, to small businesses, which, I personally would never loot because it's not what I do. But I understand why people are doing it. And I think that's what needs to happen. People need, at the very least, if you don't loot, and I personally wouldn't encourage looting, you at least need to understand why people are looting big businesses. Because if you can understand why and the bigger picture that they're trying to fight for, then it puts everything into perspective for you. Then you start to understand. It's like Fanta was saying, they're not losing anything. They can afford the damages. And like Bernie Sanders said, they've been doing this for hundreds of years. So, yeah, I don't
But I
know if
guess
you
at
want
the
to continue
same
what you were saying,
time,
Jad.
yeah, I would say at the same time, to counter that point, you don't know who exactly you're affecting here, because you don't know. These are big companies. There's a lot of people that go into these companies. You don't know who you're actually affecting. There's a chance, like, we don't know. There's a chance that you might be putting somebody in financial risk or something, like, just as an example, if you were to loot some said place. And I just think it's not exactly in our best interest to be looting, like, for people to be taking this opportunity for having all the police being, focused on one area, to be doing something in another area. It doesn't really say like anything good about the people ourselves,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
To go off what you were saying, the only negative that I was able to put together of even looting a big business is not the business itself. It's the people that lose the jobs that actually need it, because these big businesses are lower paying jobs. And oftentimes when people have lower paying jobs, they really do need the money, which is why I personally don't condone it, but I understand it. I understand it.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that, like, I definitely agree that in certain cases, looting just sort of gives a negative connotation, because a lot of times people who already subconsciously were not pro Black Lives Matter, they take that and run with it and then use that excuse to, like, discredit the whole movement. And I also think lately what I've been noticing is, before, when looting was happening, like originally, like in Minnesota, when that was where all the protests were happening, it was sort of a representation of something bigger. But I think as it went nationwide, I think that is just like a consequence that comes with
Yeah.
widespread movement. There are people specifically, and it tends to be like young white people. They see this as an excuse to live out like some anarchist fantasy. So they're just, while people are actually protesting for an important movement, they just see it as a chance to burn stuff down and break windows. So then news channels will zoom in on the window being broken, but then there are people actually marching on the street who are like, there'll be videos and it'll be the Black people running these protests literally begging these white people to stop breaking windows and stuff, because
and they're ruining the name.
Exactly. And it comes directly back onto the Black people running these protests and just the Black Lives Matter movement in general. And those people don't stand for movement. They just see this as a fun, trendy time to go and have some fun and break stuff. And those people irritate me because they don't even care about the movement.
Yep.
And in that same sense, even when they don't care about it, they're disparaging the movement, because that's what the media and people who are already against Black Lives Matter, that's what they focus on. And it's unfortunate.
Agreed. Okay.
Looters are, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna bring up a quick point. I was
Yeah,
just gonna say, in our case scenario right now, the looters are actually very directly hurting us as well. Like, I'm seeing cities nearby, such as Aurora and Naperville, being shut down because they're afraid of these looters happening, and like mass looters and all these different stuff happening. Like I was driving on a highway down to Aurora the other day. Every single ramp leading up to like the major outlet mall that's off the highway was blocked, and it just like, and there's a curfew time now, and it's just, I feel like, to say that we should focus on the looters, I agree that we shouldn't focus on the looters as much as the police, because the police are obviously like the bigger picture. The BLM and everything like that is the bigger picture right now. But this is something affecting us directly, so we need to also tackle this problem as well, as I think. I don't know about. I wouldn't offer solutions as of right now, just because of I haven't like fully worked it out in my head. But like just like generally like just shaming the whole idea of looting would be a start. I think that was just the point that I was trying to get through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So to end it off, this is the final question. Okay. This is a cool one. Why do you feel that it is bad to say all lives matter at a time like this?
I would say that statement in general at any time is kind of, it's like what the statement means objectively isn't wrong, but I think based on the history of that statement and the fact that it's only specifically made to discredit the Black Lives Matter movement, I think saying it specifically at a time like this, when the Black Lives Matter movement is getting a lot more traction, like I think saying it now just shows sort of like a level of ignorance to the sort of injustices that Black people and just POC in general face in America and globally. Like when you say that, it's like saying that you see the problem, but you don't care. It's like the whole I don't see color thing. Say all lives matter, say I don't see color. And of course Black lives matter because all lives matter. And yeah, objectively that's true, but that's not how Black people are being treated right now. So that's why we're saying Black lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just saying that is such a big way to discredit the Black Lives Matter movement, what it stands for. So I don't think anyone should be saying that, especially now.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the problem is that the fact that there's so many people seeing this movement now, they're attributing this as a new thing, that people are now saying all lives matter. But it's been happening forever. People have been, there's so much minutia to this. The fact that all lives matter is an anti-Black Lives Matter thing. And it's not, the problem is that so many people don't know that, and that's ignorance, but that's also like, if you say that all lives matter, you're taking away from the problem, and that's the main issue. The fact that, sure, all lives matter. True, everyone believes that. That's not the objective statement is not the fact that we're arguing against using those terms. It's the fact that there is so much history with it, and the fact that all lives don't matter until Black Lives Matter. And that's the point of Black Lives Matter. Yeah. That's like the thing that people don't see is the fact that Black Lives Matter isn't only Black Lives Matter, it's Black Lives Matter too. And that people don't see that is the problem. And we need to make sure that if you say all lives matter, that is against Black Lives Matter. And that's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very interesting point to say that all lives matter. It can't be a statement unless Black Lives Matter is a thing. And I 100% agree with that statement. And I 100% agree with all these good points that were brought up. I do think, however, that as well as how bad all lives matter, like the statement as itself at this very moment is a bad thing to say. I do think it could be different depending on its context, if that makes so much sense. Like, do I think that that executive that was fired for saying all lives matter? It kind of depends on the context that he used it in and all that different stuff. Obviously, at this moment, it's a terrible thing to say, and coming from a white man, a rich white man, that's probably not the greatest thing to say. But I don't know about if him being fired was the best way to go about this, if that makes sense. I'm like just voicing my opinion here. I don't know how you guys feel about that specific scenario, so I would love to hear what you guys have to say about that.
I think what needs to happen, instead of trying to kick people out of society for saying all lives matter, I think they need to be educated and they need to understand why they're wrong. Because what happens is a lot of these people don't mean, I'm not saying all of them, a lot of people don't mean harm by saying all lives matter. but rather they just need to understand why what they're saying is wrong and why what they're saying is insensitive, so that if you teach them, we can actually make progress. That's where the progress is made, by having people understand and be self-aware of where they're wrong. And as to my opinion as to why saying all lives matter is a bad thing right now. A long time ago, when I started first becoming aware of the Black Lives Matter movement and people started saying all lives matter, I never understood why saying all lives matter was bad. And then one time I was listening to Joyner Lucas. I don't know if you guys listen to his songs. He was talking. He had a whole rant in his song, and he said, "You guys keep saying all lives matter. That's just a protest to our protest. Like, what is that?" And I just sat there and thought about it. I'm like, wow, he's really right. They're just trying to distract you from what we're really fighting for. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I think that the education to educate, just for the specific scenario, to educate that executive would have been definitely a better route to take it, because now he's fired because of what he said. This doesn't guarantee that he has learned from what he said. He probably doesn't know why he's been fired. There's a big chance that that's happened. And I think that in order to reform, like I was saying before, the best way to reform and the greatest way to obtain power is through education. Because by knowing what to say and knowing how to say it and knowing all there is to society, that's how somebody can be viewed as a great person, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you guys have any final remarks before I go ahead and wrap this up?
Yeah, I actually had two things I wanted to bring to the room just to really quickly end this off and kind of add some conversation to the room. First thing I want to point out, just the response to Jad's previous statement. I think that educating people is very important, and I think that people are ignorant to this because they're new to this. There's so many people that have sadly first seeing this, the fact that Black Lives Matter is a movement, and now it's bringing so many more eyes to the movement. And I think just beating down the people that say all lives matter isn't going to work, because that angers them and that causes them to be anti-Black Lives Matter. We need to make sure that people understand why it's a problem. Yeah. And I think that that's really important. But also,
agrees.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now he's thankfully switched his opinion and apologized, and that's a big deal. And I think also, I just wanted to see, there's two things that I had in mind that I've kind of learned over these past few weeks, just with everything going on. A quick question to the room. How do you guys feel about how big businesses or corporations respond to Black Lives Matter? So with the fact that how marketing is working, like how people there's so much minutia to this, but what do you guys think of silence? What do you guys think of people saying empty lies? And what do you think of what should these corporations do?
I'm not even gonna lie. I don't believe 99.9% of these businesses what they're saying. I really don't. They just don't want their stores to be looted. They just want to keep their, I don't buy it. I really don't.
Yeah, obviously I'm not going to say every corporation is doing this for a PR stunt, but you can tell that they all if you compile 50 corporations and their statements, they all look the same. The same template, the same black screen, white font. It's very clear that they were like, this is a good look for us if we put out a statement. And then very recently, speaking on that, a lot of beauty influencers, like makeup artists and stuff, they were calling on these companies that were releasing these statements, specifically makeup companies, to release their numbers. How many Black staff do you have? How many of those are in executive positions? Or are you just saying Black Lives Matter and then not actually putting in the work to hire Black people and have Black people on your staff? And some of these numbers were very embarrassing. And I think if they asked that of the corporations, different field, like the Walmart, Target, every brand who's posting their black square with white font, and ask them to pull out their numbers of how many Black executives they have, it would be very clear that they did this as a PR stunt, because they don't actually put the work in real life. Because it's easy to say Black Lives Matter, but it's hard to actually put in the work to hire Black people and hire just people of color in general in their workforce, and to actually make change. Because for makeup artists, for makeup specifically, seeing how few Black people they have on their staff translates into their makeup, because those are the same companies being called out for a pitiful shade range or only tailoring to light skin. You know what I mean? That's what happens when you have Black people in your executive staff to say, hey, that's there, dark skinned people exist. So I think if those companies want to prove that they're actually about it, they should also pull out their numbers and dedicate funds or time to actually empower Black people and hire more Black people, because they barely have any.
Yeah, the only one I believe is Reddit. One of the top executives stepped down.
Yeah.
And they changed their logo. They didn't just change it on the app. They changed their logo. That is huge.
Yeah.
I think that is huge. I believe Reddit. I don't believe anybody else.
He stepped down. He said, I've made all the money I have that I could make, so it's time I'm going to let a Black person into my position. You know what I mean? And I think that's really great. Shout out to Serena Williams. She picked a good husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good guy. Okay.
I probably couldn't add anything more than what Fanta said. I think that was very well put.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like, it's been interesting to see how all these different brands kind of respond to it. Just like either with nothing, with silence. And I think part of that is an issue, because if you're not talking about it, then you're scared what would happen if you did talk about it. And that's a bad like face to have. And I think that with these, I mean, it's not the biggest issue, obviously, but these businesses and corporations have such big followings of such diverse personalities that if they do speak out for Black Lives Matter, so many different people will have their eyes on this issue that wouldn't have cared at all before. And I think that's a big thing in society today.
Yeah.
And one last thing to add, there's so much learning that's happening with this. There's the one thing that I kind of like took away from the last few days is not every individual knows everything. There's this one hashtag on Twitter, ACAB, and for the longest time I didn't actually know what it meant, and I didn't look into it for some reason. And if you don't know what it means, it stands for all cops are bastards, and a lot of people misconstrue it to all cops are bad. And there's a very distinct difference between those two. And the reason why it matters is because the history with ACAB is the fact that it's talking about the system and not individuals. It's not saying that every cop is a bad person. It's saying that every cop is a bastard, because every cop brings about this issue through the systemic problems in the police force. There's so many cops just letting things slide because they're part of the police force, even though they know their peers are doing wrong, or they know that there's higher ups forcing wrong upon them, forcing the fact that they need to have quotas put in place to jail minorities and Black people, and they need to kill people just because they're Black and they have a difference. They have like, these, I'm looking for the right words to say here, but they have these preconceived notions in their head that certain people are going to be more dangerous than other people just because of the color of their skin. And that's a really big movement. And I think that, learning about it has made me more, insightful on the fact that not everything is what it seems. And the last thing, I know I've been talking a lot, but the very last thing I wanted to say is that you need to educate your friends, your family, because if you just, not many people watch the news anymore, because there are so many more outlets that are more sourceful and more important to look at. But if you look at the news, the way they're portraying these protesters is awful, because they know what eyes are gleamed to. They're looking at the rioters. They're looking at the looters. And if you just think about it in the mind of people that only watch cable news, they think that this entire movement is wrong. And that's scary to think, because there's so much more information from direct feeds like Twitter and things, like when you actually see what's happening in the world from individual people of what's happening, it changes your viewpoint. And everyone lives in a bubble. And you need to know that not everyone gets the same information that you do. And even though your friends are okay, or the people around you think the same way you do, you need to know that there's an entire opposition force there that don't believe that. And you need to spread your voice and make sure that other people understand what your viewpoints are, so that they're not misconstrued and they're not looking at the wrong things and focusing on the wrong things.
All right. Thank you, Irfan. Well, I
Thank you.
wanted to thank you guys for taking time out of your precious days to come with us and to educate people. So with that being said, I'm going to end the podcast here. Down in the description below, I'm going to be putting links on how to contact your local congressmen and senators. I'm also going to be putting helpful links on how to promote the Black Lives Matter movement, the petitions you can sign, how you can donate, everything you can possibly do to make your voice heard. Thank you guys for watching. Peace out.